Since leaving the RAF, one of the questions I'm often asked is, do I not miss the flying? And I'm very lucky because I've signed actually back on to fly in the RAF as a volunteer, and I now go back and I fly cadets aged 13 to 18 from air training corps from around the country, and I give them an experience of what it's like to fly. They get 30 minutes in the air, and I was due to do that yesterday. I went to where I fly from, it's Boscombe Down near Salisbury, and it's a big test pilot school at Boscombe Down. It's a very interesting airfield to operate from because it has a mixture of big multi-engines like airliner equivalent aircraft, plus it has helicopters buzzing all over the place from rotary wing training squadron, and it also has fast jets, mixture of Hawks, Tornadoes, and then it has us, the tutor aircraft, going at 120 knots. So trying to actually operate in a circuit pattern over an airfield with all of those different types can be pretty stressful, not just for us, but for actually everybody involved in that industry. And yesterday was no exception. It was a really busy day. The weather was on our limits to fly, and as I checked in to fly, I haven't actually flown very much recently because I've had back surgery, and I'm only recently getting my currency back. So I had about 3 hours of flying. I was due to fly my first cadet sortie in about 20 months. So you can imagine the pressure was on a little bit. I'm very experienced on type there. I've got over 2,500 hours of flying, of which 400 are actually on the tutor aircraft itself. So I pitch up to fly for the day, and I notice that there are lots of University Air Squadron cadets around as well. And they are 18 to 21-year-olds at university, and they've started flying for the first time. And there were quite a few of them down to do their first ever solo flight in an aircraft. Now this is a really big event, a first solo. You can imagine they're feeling quite stressed. Now, the weather was a solid cloud base at 2,000 feet, so it was fine for us to fly our cadets, and we went off, and I flew 4 in the morning and then 4 again in the afternoon. Now, as I was coming in on probably about my 7th trip of the day, I'm now starting to feel a little bit tired. I've also heard the same things over and over again. And as I'm recovering back to base with a cadet, I notice that it's really, really busy in the circuit, and that's a pattern that goes right over the top of the airfield, and everyone fits into this pattern to enable them to land in turn. Now as I'm coming in, there's a helicopter that's doing engine off landings, there's a large airliner that's doing circuit training, and we have 2 or 3 of the University Air Squadron cadets, one of whom is on their first solo, also buzzing around the circuit. So as you're coming up to join that pattern, you've got to very, very quickly assimilate all of this information that's going on in front of you, and it can be incredibly stressful. You're also trying to stay incredibly calm to the person next to you because they have never flown before, and they're often chatting very inappropriately about a farmhouse they spot or a swimming pool that someone's got in their garden. So you're not wanting to actually put that down, but at the same time say, I'm quite busy at this moment in time and I probably need to be focusing on what's really important. Now as I was joining that circuit, I try to fit into the best possible place, but as I'm doing so, I'm realising that my solo student that's only, on his first ever trip is also trying to fit into a circuit, and he is probably very, very stressed. His capacity will be sapped up with doing that trip alone. And so you try to give him as much space as possible. So what I'm saying is, what am I actually doing at that point? Well, I'm assessing a situation, I'm working out where my biggest risks are, where are the threats coming from. I'm also trying to increase my situational awareness. And this word, situational awareness, SA we call it, is so important for flying. Because actually by raising our situational awareness, we can actually impart the mental model that we're building up and try and share it with other people around us. You might be thinking, well, what's that got to do with business or the like? But as I was coming in, I thought I need to share where I'm going to be in this circuit to all the other people. And so I try to pass as much information on to others to raise their awareness. You could put an equivalent of driving a car. If you're driving along a motorway and you suddenly notice that the brake lights in front of you come on, you slam your brake lights on, but unfortunately the person behind you is not quick enough to react and they hit the back of your car. If, however, you're driving along a motorway and you're listening to the radio, you happen to hear that there's a crash up ahead. So you're anticipating the brake lights coming on. When you now see those brake lights coming, you can do a really, really appropriate level of braking. But you see the person behind you is not, because your awareness is already so much higher. and you pop your hazards on. It gets their awareness higher, and then they can brake appropriately too. So actually, by having an understanding, and we call it a perception of the situation that's around us, understanding what has happened, what is happening at the moment, and projecting that into the future is so important. And it's so important for business as well. There are so many different read acrosses between the aviation industry and that of business. Decision making under pressure, risk assessment, threats. But actually, the one aspect that I think aviation is very far ahead in is when we look at how has it created the environment. I mean, there's nothing routine about flying. There's nothing routine about flying in a war zone. Okay, the stakes are a lot higher, but actually, how is it that this industry has created one of the safest ones around? The latest statistics read 1 incident in 8.4 million departures. Now that's one incredible safety record. So how have they done that? They have done it by creating a culture which learns from the mistakes that are made. It's called a just culture. In the early days of aviation, we started off by having a blame culture. When an aircraft crashed, we looked at who was to blame, and it was normally, fortunately, it was obviously seen as being the pilots. Often they were dead. And blame is a delicious emotion. It was Professor James Reason, who is a professor at Manchester University, that said that. And it's so true. We want to blame somebody, especially in this litigious society we are in, when by any mistake that's made, even in a hospital environment or perhaps in the financial sector, we want to blame somebody. But ultimately, often it's not that individual. If we look further up the chain, you'll find that perhaps it was the stress levels, perhaps it was the planning, the scheduling, perhaps there were flaws in the regulation. It can build all the way up, even to government level. And so why should we blame the individual? So if we want to find what's truly happening in the system, we've got to find a way of capturing all of that data, of that information. We want to find out when somebody nearly makes a mistake. So for every one major incident that we have in the aviation industry, there are 30 minor incidents which still require a mandatory report to go in. But beneath the waterline, there have been 300 near misses. So back to the old days, we have the crash, we look who to blame, and we react. It's all reactive. But now that we've created this culture whereby we are not in a blame culture, we are in a culture whereby we actually accept that competent professionals make mistakes, and that competent professionals even may deviate from procedures, because we are human after all. We accept that. And therefore, when a mistake is made, we want to know what it is. We report it. And suddenly those 300 beneath the waterline events are actually providing the data to give us the ability to make risk-based decisions. We know now where to spend our money because we're talking. We're not just talking, we're learning. Can you imagine how proactive that culture would be within your organisation if you could find out what was going on beneath the waterline? Because if you can find out what's going on beneath the waterline, suddenly you're no longer flying blind. And that's where I can help. I try to distill all of our lessons from aviation into practical examples to take to the aviation industry straight into the business sector. I've been doing it really now since the 5 years since I've left, and I found that there's so much that can be learnt. So I look forward to joining you at some point in the future.